And we are live. I will also apologize in advance for two things. One, that uh, we're doing this on a Saturday when my kids are awake, and last time they were preoccupied doing other things, not at home. But today they're home, so we might hear the odd child screaming or playing or making loud noises. But I'm the long-term strategy, I think, besides Isaiah's job, is just breed as many libertarians as possible. So I'm at 5 and counting. We'll see if any more come in God's will. I'm here, guys. I see some of you are coming in now. This Object of Winograd, of course. We're here live in the green room, joined by Liquid Zulu again. We decided to do kind of an impromptu stream here tonight, or today, this afternoon for me, and talk about some of the things that have kind of been in the wind on both on Twitter and on Discord, and some of the conversations that we've had just about libertarian theory. It's stuff that I'm interested in hashing out, seeing if we, to some extent, I think that we agree more than we disagree, and this just needs to be talked out to get rid of some semantical, perhaps disagreements. Also, the last stream I did with Dave, there were quite a few super chats that I did not get to read because it was a very impromptu stream. I was not prepared to really read super chats, and by the time we were done talking, we were 3 hours in, and I was exhausted, and my wife and kids needed me, so I didn't have time to read them when I was done. But I have the old super chat from that stream up here, and I was going to just read them as a show of good faith, since people paid money, and I appreciate them paying money, and I don't want them to feel too chapped about that. Monhop left a couple at the beginning. He said, "Will I get kicked off? Will I get kicked from this chat if I cite Hoppe?" I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that. Then he asked a question which might have been for Dave or me or both. He said, "So are you a pragmatist, or is calling you that a straw man and a bait and switch?" By the way, Zulu explains in the video why radical pragmatism is nonsense. That's partly what we're here to talk about actually today, I think. And I'm completely, maybe pragmatism is the wrong word to describe what I'm going for. We'll leave the criticisms for Dave and what he's going for the debate we're working on trying to schedule. But I do get, I think we'll kind of leave that for what we're going to be talking about here today. Casimir left one saying, and you brought this up in your stream, offering to fly you to New York City to do a Soham Forum debate. See, I don't know if now maybe Gene would do it if Dave's involved, because Dave's just a much bigger name than me. But I know you and I tried setting up a similar, we proposed a similar resolution to Gene, and he said it was too similar to the debate that he had with David Friedman.
Yeah.
And so he didn't feel like, doing it. So I don't know that Soho will be where it does. It looks like most likely I will end up hosting this debate once we sort of get the resolution that we want debated to be resolved. Although I'd be completely fine if it went to the Crucible or elsewhere as well. Let's see, Liberty Dad made a super chat. By the way, if you have anything you want to say to these, let me know, but I'm just going to keep reading through them. Liberty Dad said Dave should go on Liberty Dad's Dad Talk series to chat about being dads. I'm going to be going on Liberty Dad's channel on December 8th, I think. He's put together a roundtable of libertarian dads to just talk about dad stuff. Free Men Die Free said Ron Paul already told us what needs done in his book, The Revolution, a Manifesto. Take back the state government, rendering the feds powerless. Now, I think, get your thoughts on this, Zulu. I think that's kind of still, and I tried to, propose this to Dave to be like, I still believe in that strategy, right? Like, beyond just for me, the Mises Caucus thing, I got into it because I wanted the Libertarian Party to be libertarian, to message better. And I thought the decentralized revolution political strategy was if you're going to have a political strategy, that's the right political strategy. And I still believe that's our only path forward on a litany of issues. I don't think there's really any other viable solutions to many of the problems we have, other than this sort of, pairing of a radical message with a incremental decentralization, whether you start by decentralizing back to a state level and then to a local level. It's not perfectly libertarian, but I still think that it's I don't know. I think that's the best path forward. You anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's perfectly in line, or at least potentially perfectly in line. You might be doing it outside of libertarianism, but it's perfectly possible to be a libertarian, to be a radical libertarian, and advocate more power for the states rather than the federal government, because that's ultimately, as long as you're building towards that final goal of abolishing the state, which obviously a very big step towards that would be if the federal government no longer existed. And anywhere
Right.
you can push towards that is going to be definitely a benefit. But
Yeah.
I don't think that is solely what Dave Smith does. I think he definitely does engage in the philosophy of pragmatism, and I think I evidenced that quite clearly.
Yeah, and we'll you guys will get into that, and we'll get into probably some of that here a little bit. Huge Hat Harold said, Dave, here's a challenge right now. Go ahead and steel man the open borders position. Let's see it. If I get that debate, probably if we get to if we do some kind of moderated cross-examination section, I would like to actually pose that to Dave, to be like, Dave, argue for Zulu's position or even my position on why we don't agree with calling for any border restriction, steelman that position. I would like to see him do that. Free Man Die Free said, libertarians have become divided, born out of frustration and failing to succeed. The energy of the Mises Caucus was superb and needed, but honed. And I will grant you, we'll probably disagree when it comes to Dave being pragmatic, and I don't think I'm being pragmatic in the sense of what you're saying. But I will grant you that there are libertarians who were even in the Mises Caucus orbit or were part of the Mises Caucus who I think have definitely deviated from what I'm trying to say we should do into just we should abandon the theory, abandon the principles, and just settle for the thing I'm seeing the most now is America first. They're like, well, what if we rebranded the Libertarian Party and made it the America First Party? Now, I'll admit on one hand, I almost would support that just because then I wouldn't have to care about the party anymore, having the name Libertarian and then feeling like I have to gatekeep it from people who want to make it be this, we're fiscal conservatives and socially liberal, lukewarm stuff. So it would kind of make my life and my attention span and the things I got to pay attention to easier. On the other hand, I don't know that would be a very worthwhile project. And for the libertarians who are doing that, I think they have definitely. I think the criticisms you have for Dave are much more applicable to those types.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other one I saw was, I think it was Angela McCarter was like, "Oh, let's make it the Make America Healthy Again party." It's like, okay, so you're now making a whole political party tied to a sub brand of Donald Trump, which is basically just RFK's brand. It seems like it doesn't strike me that has very much staying power at all. Certainly not as much as the Libertarian Party, which is supposed to be based in the libertarian philosophy. It's a massive mistake, I think, to do
Now,
that.
what
But I
if
mean, at least then I wouldn't have to be tied to it. I will just say, Huge Hat Harold just gave me $5, so thank you very much, Huge Hat Harold.
Yeah, I think that the if a rebrand that I would probably be in favor of is if you renamed it to be just the Liberty Party or something, because that's kind of what didn't Argentina's Liberty Party is not called the Libertarian Party. I don't think it is something more like a I don't know. I can't speak the language, so I don't know what it means, but it
It's like
translates to
Liberty
more of a
Advances or something.
Yeah, something like that. So it's like, and that worked for them. So maybe that's what we have to do here. And that could be something where you could get a broader based coalition of people, but then not have to worry about watering down your principles in the same way. So
Then it becomes confusing. Like, what principles are these people even trying to push? Because if it starts being the America First party or whatever, it's definitely going to be incompatible with libertarian principles, and then you lose the entire libertarian base. So it's like, okay, well, what principles are you now going for? Like republicanism
yeah,
too?
and I'm fine with libertarians like Dave going on conservative platforms and just saying, listen, if you want to be America first, this foreign policy, which requires this massive printing of money and this huge financial burden on the the domestic, tax-paying population that debases the currency, and that also causes all this suffering around the world. Like we obviously care more about everything I just said as libertarians, but if you want to at least hold conservatives' feet to the fire and be like, hey, explain to me how this foreign policy is putting America first, because it doesn't seem to be, I'm fine with that. But my pinned tweet on or pinned post on X, I'm always dead naming X, calling it Twitter and tweets. But my pinned post is that, like, I'm Christian first and liberty second, and I'm only America insofar as it doesn't contradict the first two. So I don't have much, like, I don't hate America. Like, there's things about the American history that I find valuable, that I think were like developments in the history of humans moving in the direction of liberty. But there's also a lot of bad and a lot of like American exceptionalism and worshiping the American mythos in a way that, like, I think pushes in an anti-liberty direction. I am curious what you think about that as someone who lives outside of the States, what your perception of that is.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that pretty much the America First coalition seems to be run by socialists who want to have socialism in America. Like Nick Fuentes seems to be the biggest America First figure, and what does he? He explicitly says that he wants socialism. So I don't know exactly
He's
how
calling the
that is any
coalition
sort
with
of
the socialists now.
exactly. Like this is,
Yeah.
what do we want to have the Republican Socialists of America to fight against the Democratic Socialists of America? It doesn't strike me as a positive development in the slightest.
At least they're saying the quiet part out loud now, that they're right-wing
Yeah.
socialists. But anyway, Tucker Marler said, Dave Smith, I sincerely want to thank you for introducing me into libertarianism 4 years ago. You changed my life, and I do think that you should debate Zulu and watch his course. I meant to put that one up, and it just flew off my screen. I never made it back to it, but I guess I agree with that. I love Dave. I still think of him as a libertarian and a force for good, obviously. Definitely changed my life. But I think it'd be good for, he doesn't have to, but I think he's going to now debate you. I think it'd be productive. And I think your course is good. I think the things that you produce are good, even where we disagree. So, Free Men Die Free. There's only two more here. He said the Mises Caucus is still needed to clear the libertarian name from the gay rights party masquerading as a libertarian party. I'd mostly agree with that. Then Michael Letwin, last super chat from that stream, said Clint Russell has charisma. He could be the nominee. Dave would be a good running mate in 2028. And then there's one super chat on this stream from Chris Baker, author, who said, now that I'm not on the old stream, I can actually click this one. It seems like Christian libertarians are the only ones who can have polite debates. Why is that? Why do libertarians argue with things I don't say? Yeah, I don't know. I know non-Christian libertarians who are good hosts. Like, actually, the guy I just who left a super chat on the other stream, Liberty Dad, not a Christian, very nice guy, very charitable host. I think that's much more of a temperament thing, like than anything. But I do try to, as much as I can, as a member of LCI, I don't want to do, put it this way, I want conversations to happen with people who I disagree with on a litany of issues, because I just think that if all I ever did was have people on who I agree with, I'm not going to grow my own ideas, my own philosophy, my own theology, and the audience isn't learning anything. Learning happens, and this is a biblical principle. It's the whole iron sharpening iron, but like learning and advancement happens through friction, through competition. Like that's free market principles at play, I think. So, all right. So we're here to talk about this, a couple things, but I wanted to start with, and this is deep into the theory, but I think this is good to talk out because we were in your Discord, I guess like last night, and I was chatting with some of your people about because they were I guess in in a friendly way for the most part, and interrogating me on my beliefs and my my ANCAP credentials, right? And I was like, well, I think I'm an ANCAP, but like if you guys don't think I'm an ANCAP, let me know where I'm falling short in living up to that sort of title. And they postulated the classic, like, would you steal a penny? Or would you steal a ladder? I prefer the would you steal a ladder to save your grandma or your child analogy. I think it's a much more apt analogy. I listened to your we're kind of like hitting like and this is why I wanted to have you on, because I was like, what am I supposed to do now? Dave did a 3-hour response video to the little bit of your 3.5-hour video you watched, and then you did a 5.5-hour video responding to our video. And I was like, so what am I supposed to do? Do a 7-hour video responding? I was like, no, I'm just gonna have him on because that's just gonna be way less, I mean, we're going way past autistic at that point. So but yeah, so like in that stream, you brought up a good point, which I hadn't considered before, about why kind of the penny analogy to save the world. You can almost dismiss it because of, if I'm remembering right, for one, you said that, which there's probably some truth to this, that like it is kind of hard to imagine this advanced alien species coming here and like holding us hostage in this weird thing. But like, how would they be this advanced while being that unethical? Just, I guess it's not like it's maybe not an argument, or it's not like some people might say that that's a cop out, but I think there's some weight to that idea that like you're putting the how'd you put it? You're putting the fruits of ethics before, like in a situation where there's no ethics or something like that.
Yeah, it's like you can only have that level of advancement if you have the correct philosophy in place, right? There's no other way to do it. So how did they get then clearly they don't have the correct philosophy in place. So clearly they would have had to, have had the correct philosophy and then undergone some sort of ethical regression. And now they're just totally irrational, which is like, that could happen. And very quickly they're going to consume all of their hyper advanced technology, and they won't be able to do this forever. But maybe we're in like a really unlucky situation where this super duper advanced alien race, which had like 70 Aristotles get them up to this point, and then suddenly they had like an Omega Plato who managed to tear it all down, and now they're all raving irrationalists. Okay, maybe that happens, but then you're dealing with irrationalists. By definition of the scenario, they have to be hugely irrational to be spending all these massive resources, and their demand is to get a penny. Like clearly they're running some sort of strange trick upon people. And then upon what possible reason would you expect them to stop at the penny? Well, clearly this is a massively irrational group of aliens here. It was basically like, okay, well, I'm gonna steal the penny, give it to them, and then they're like, okay, and now rape that woman over there. Okay, and now kick that baby. Okay, and it's like, okay, well, eventually it just gets to the point of aliens come down, and they're going to blow up the planet, and there's nothing it's possible for you to do. So what do you do? So nothing, I guess. Like there's nothing I can do.
Right. So like I think in that specific situation, I actually agree with you. And other than like I think the other point you made was that like at that point, if like people would probably, it wouldn't even be theft at that point. People would be like, yeah, take the damn penny. Maybe they'll go away, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't even necessarily really have to steal it, or you wouldn't really be. But I think a more realistic example, which we actually talked, I guess, a couple months ago on X back and forth on this, and what was the stealing a ladder to save your grandmother, right? And I none of my grandmothers are alive, so for me to put it in more personal terms, like putting a um, stealing a ladder to like save my child, right? It is a more apt description because like, I could have like a baby. I actually have a 15-month-old and she can kind of crawl a little bit, but she's not like my other kids who could get up and run and do anything for themselves, right? So, and it's kind of like, well, would you would you steal the ladder, and is that justified, right? And I guess the answer I had, which I want to get into, where we disagree on this, and I'm drawing not just from like my understanding of libertarianism here, but like the Bible actually has quite a lot to say on maybe not like this exact hyper situation, but just in general, there's a lot of passages in Exodus, Leviticus, and Proverbs, in terms of like, uh, if you steal and then you show remorse for it, uh, or if you steal because you're hungry, or something like that. And in both instances, the Bible is clear, like it doesn't stop becoming theft. They're like, well, no, you've still stolen, and at the end of the day, you're going to have to do some kind of restitution, pay some kind of penalty. And I think in I think it's like 5 times or 7 times recompense or something like that. It's the biblical standard in those examples. But that the person who was stolen from is just kind of like generally is like, hey, like this person stole because they were starving, maybe not because like they're, necessarily uh this most evil person with hate in their heart and wanting to aggress upon you. So like, you have a right to claim your stuff back. But you might be encouraged to show some kind of mercy towards them. But it doesn't say it's not theft. And so I guess based on that, and just based on, we've talked about this before, the debate that Gene and David had, I kind of agree. And I know what your rebuttal is going to be, but I agree with the kind of sentiment that like, if you're in these kind of weird no-win scenarios where you either let something really awful happen, or you do some violation of the non-aggression principle, I would say that, all things being equal, all sort of like, like there's no, like, I don't have my own ladder, I don't, I'm, et cetera. Like the guy, like, obviously I could say that like if the guy's right there in his garage and has the ladder, I wouldn't just grab it. Like I'd be like, hey, can I please borrow your ladder, and say, right? Like, but if like I want, my neighbor who I don't have a relationship with, his garage is open and I see he has a ladder in it, and so I just go in and I take it, and I climb up and I save my child and I come back down. Then I go and restore the ladder. Then I would try to find my neighbor at some point when I can find him again, and be like, hey, I took your ladder without permission because my son was in danger, and here it is, it's back. But like I'd basically put myself at his at the feet of his mercy at that point, right? Because I did technically commit a crime. Like even if you steal something and
I'm
then
not so
return
sure
it,
about that.
Okay, well, go ahead and respond then.
Yeah, so in the situation you outlined there, where there is no prior communication referring to the ladder, and your house is on fire all of a sudden, and you see that your neighbor has this ladder, I would say it's fully understood in any neighborhood I've ever been to, that in such a situation your neighbor would let you borrow the ladder. Um, so the way that it was on Twitter initially, the place where it got to was that your neighbor has been explicitly telling you, for months and months and months, hey, stop fucking taking my ladder, asshole. You cannot, under no circumstances, are you allowed to have this ladder. And then in that situation, it sounds a whole lot like, well, I mean, after a certain point, get your own fucking ladder. Why is it your neighbor's job? Because that's really what my main point with these things is, for them to actually be legitimate. Well, eventually you get to the point where you have to posit that the person who's in this situation, in the emergency, is this bumbling fool who has gotten themselves into the emergency. And in which case, that kind of takes out quite a bit of the sting of the scenario where, yeah, you can get into these emergencies, but only by your own incompetence. Now, there's another angle to this as well, where imagine there hasn't been prior communication about the ladder. One day your neighbor just comes up to you and is like, hey, if within the next hour your house is mysteriously on fire, you are not allowed to use my ladder to save your grandmother who sleeps in that room up there. And you follow the pointing of his finger, and sure enough, you see your house is ablaze. It's like, okay, well, then in such a situation, what is the conclusion you come to? Well, obviously, this guy's just set my fucking house on fire. This guy set my house on fire. Isn't going to let me get the ladder. So what you do is you take out your firearm and you shoot him in the chest until he's down on the ground. Then you take that fucking ladder and you try and put out the fire or whatever. Like when you actually take these, because I mean it's fine. I'm fine with people using reductors ad absurdum. I'm perfectly fine with that. But you have to understand what it's literally asking. What it's literally asking with these like reductors ad absurdum for the NEP. It's saying, are there exceptions to the NEP? And it's perfectly legitimate to just say no to that. That's what biting the bullet is. But when you actually take it out of being a pure hypothetical, and let's do as Dave asks, let's live in the real world for a second. When you actually try and imagine these things really happening, the silliness of them kind of undoes them for you.
I agree.
If you just actually imagine this happening, like the silliness of the ladder example is clearly this guy fucking lit your house on fire. So this guy does not get to dictate how you're going to stop his crime, right?
Yeah, or he's the bumbling idiot who, and I, there's definitely a point there where it's like, just forget the micro example. There is, with this type of reductio, and I remember this from the first time we talked about this, there is a slippery slope of sorts here that can lead to a sort of enabling of predation and sort of like being a sort of a leech or parasitical sort of populace on the producer class. And what we don't want to do as libertarians is sort of enable that. We don't want to say, like, it's okay to sort of like what's the right way to put this? To sort of incentivize people to not try to take personal responsibility for their security, for their financial circumstances, for the provision of their family and their loved ones, and just kind of be like, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to live my life completely haphazardly and not analyze risk and not plan ahead and just kind of rely on the goodwill of the people who are producing and who are being responsible to just always bail me out when I get into these bad situations. And so that's sort of the, I guess, like, reverse, not really reductio, but just kind of like the slippery slope of, because I think there's this tendency for people to go like, well, yeah, there's people who can just kind of like be in these emergency situations that are unpredictable. And I think generally know, removing the reductio aside, that like a lot of these things are kind of worked out generally by people who are reasonable, just to kind of be like, same with like the flagpole thing. Like, first of all, like, it is kind of weird to be like, what were you doing on the roof? How did you fall? How did you fall in such a way that like, you landed on a flagpole and didn't lose your grip and your arms didn't, come out of sight. So like, once you've kind of like tried to imagine like how you even get there, then it's like, okay, well, like, if you're in this weird thing and like, it's hard to imagine just what kind of person would come to their window, see you on the flagpole, and just be like, get off my flagpole, you SOB, right? And just and not be like, oh crap, and just like let you in and be like, oh, are you okay? And just be like, I'm so glad that you caught my flagpole, and like just make sure you're okay, and then let you go walk on your day. That's how that usually works out. But we create these reductios to be like, yeah, we're stress testing our commitment to the non-aggression principle. And I agree with you that as it's not good, and it would be sort of like venturing into something approximating pragmatism to say that like that there are situations in life where the the non-aggression principle is no longer a valid principle. I think that's the thing you
Yeah,
have to be wary of doing.
and like the thing is, like, you have to uphold that ultimately you do have the right to be the asshole in these situations and not save the person with your own property. Because if you don't uphold that, then you immediately get into socialism. And I'll explain how. You're saying like we're discussing like these people who like bumble their way into emergencies, and there is the old saying, never let a good emergency go to waste, right? These
Yes.
these people, if you had a society of these bumbling fools who realize the second that they bumble their way into some emergency, they're allowed to just sink their teeth into the nearest productive individual and predate upon them because he has no rights to stop them from doing that. Well, very quickly you're going to have an incentive towards being a bumbling fool because you can just way easier get whatever you need to survive. And what do we end up with? We end up with from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Right? These bumbling fools, they need all this help all the time because they're constantly in emergencies. As a lot of, chronically poor people are, they tend to be like in these emergencies, disasters, just constant chaos in their lives because they really are like that. They really are just bumbling fools who shouldn't be subsidized, right? We shouldn't subsidize that behavior. That's how you get a massive underclass of welfare leeches, which is just a total disaster.
Yeah, I agree with that. Human Nature brought up uh, sort of a scenario here, which I think is different. Playing off this, imagine you have a neighbor who hates you and has said you are never allowed on his property. Would you trespass to save his child if his house was on fire and nobody was around to help you? Now, that's kind of an interesting flip of the script there. So what do you think about
That
that?
would not be trespassing. So in this situation, it wouldn't be trespassing to go on to the property to save the child, because fundamentally, forestalling is a crime. So if this guy, if the child is in danger, if your neighbor tries to exclude you from protecting that child, he's actually forestalling the guardianship over that child, which is a crime. So he wouldn't be allowed to enforce any restrictions on you going and saving the child. So I reject the premise that that would be trespassing.
Gotcha. That's an interesting way out of that with the forestalling thing. I'm going to hold because we have comments about forestalling too to talk about later in the donut homesteading scenario. Um, I do think. Well, Heyman had a response here. I guess I'll read it. He said, forget a crime for the moment. Is it a violation of the NAP? He made his desires clear."
No, it's not aggression. Because I what I mean when I say crime, I mean that's
You mean
aggression
the
because I'm a
non-aggression
natural
principle?
operator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like so the problem is, as you said, with these reductios, we can often find ways around them. I do think, there's probably, I don't want to waste too much brain power on this, but like there's probably some perfectly constructed reductio or scenario. Again, these kind of like no-win scenarios where you're in a position where you're faced with this sort of what is a violation of the NAP or potentially, right? Because sometimes you're in these heat of the moment situations and you don't have necessarily the time to stop and like, well, let me, uh, let me figure out the philosophical nature of this dilemma I'm in, and then act, right? Sometimes these things are kind of bang bang, and you have to just sort of do something. Um, but just me as a parent, like if my and even if let's say I would agree with you, let's say I was a bumbling parent, even just like temporarily, and just from my own sort of like negligence, like let's say like I'm out in public with my child and like at a fair or something, or I don't know, and suddenly he puts himself in a situation that's dangerous, and the only way I can save him is that like I have to uh go past areas that say don't pass, or let's say even like he's trapped in
Again,
something
forestalling.
like, sorry, what?
If they try to enforce that, they'd be forestalling the guardianship over that child.
Well, like, oh, because so what I was about to say though is like, what if to like save my child, I had to I don't know, like break something of someone else's in order to get to my
I mean,
child, right?
forestalling applies across the board. If it really is required, like, maybe they like slip down into some like shed or something, and you've got to break down the door in order to get them out of there because like it's dangerous in there for whatever reason, or they like broke their leg and they're gonna have like troubles. They got to go to the hospital now. Then it would be forestalling for somebody to enforce the exclusion from that shed. If it's required to save the child to break down the door, then you're allowed to break down the door.
So are you saying that to protect now, is this only do like so what if this was an adult? Just saving an adult who is in distress. Does the same thing apply there to save some person who's in distress that like we can that someone's right to a property is not is sort of superseded by the rights of people to save an adult who is in danger?
So it becomes complex here. So I want to be very clear. When I'm saying child as like a legal term, I'm meaning any potential self owner, any person who's a human person and all that who has the potential to make decisions, act, get into
Yes.
conflicts, avoid conflicts, all that type of thing. So I would count like the passed out man on the side of the road in the snow. He's also a child. So if it's literally an adult, that means he's actually able to communicate his will and take action with respect to this scenario. So it's up to him to fucking get the hell out of there, right? And the owner's absolutely allowed to enforce exclusion against an adult here and be like, hey, adult, get the fuck out of my goddamn shed. Now, they wouldn't be allowed to seal the shed off out of spite and be like, no, you're staying in there forever now, because that would be forestalling him from getting, elsewhere outside the shed. But yeah, no, he's definitely probably committed
So
some. He would be committing a crime if he refused to leave, basically.
so like what if so what if it's my wife in a burning building and she is an adult, and let's say she's not, because I was going to say like what if she was like pinned down by a beam or something, but I'm wondering if that would also almost say like if I don't know if that would cross over into her being in a disabled status and perhaps in a
Mhm.
different that might be messy, but we'll just say she's just because and not to diss on my wife or to be sexist here, but my wife is 5'2" and quite capable when it comes to lifting our children and playing with them. But like if she needed to bust a door down or something while she's in a burning building, she probably doesn't have the strength to do that, right? So um and let's say that like the only way she sees out is that like, oh, there's this open window, but it's too high up, and so then I go and steal, like what if we're in like the city, and then like I just run into, I just happen to be next to a hardware store, and they have a ladder, um, but I don't have time to stop and pull my wallet out or whatever and pay for it, so I go and I take the ladder. Um, to save my wife, or I thought, there's a construction crew nearby even, and their ladders are out. I go and grab the ladder and use it and save her. Um, now at that point in either scenario, if I come down and they're like, "Hey, buddy, like hey, good job saving your wife, but that's my ladder and you stole it." Um, I might try to like plead to their like humanity, to like their goodwill, but if but ultimately at the end of the day, I might, depending on whatever we have to do to make the scenario say that like I actually aggressed and stole, um if I was convinced that like, hey, I made a bad I was in a situation in the moment where I was just thinking about saving my wife, and yeah, I stole your ladder, so I guess I committed a crime, and I'm going to apologize about it. I'm going to try to find a way to, between me and this individual I've aggressed against, make restitution with. Same as if like I was not paying attention while I'm driving and miss a stop sign, and I drive go through the intersection, run into someone's car, and hurt them, and they, it's like that's like an aggression without necessarily like uh there wasn't any like ill intent in my heart, but it was just like, hey, I I I made an error in living life
Mhm.
responsibly. Now I've committed this aggression. I have to, you know, pay some kind of restitution. I don't think now obviously the one's kind of an accident, unintentionally. The other one is kind of more like I'm choosing to do this, but I'm trying to save a person. I guess my intuition is just that there can be situations where one might even willingly, sort of consciously, violate the NAP because they're trying to do something that they see as like a emergency service to something good, like saving a life or whatnot, especially if it's someone they know, or even complete strangers. We see people sometimes do acts of heroism to save complete strangers. And I guess it's just my sense that, like, well, you to me, I resolve this by saying the NAP is, it's not that it doesn't apply. It's just that there are these emergency situations where there are, I guess, like, I, as a Christian, I could say they're objective goods, right? Because I think saving a life is sort of like a sort of biblical mandate. But you can even just say, like, subjectively on the objectivist worldview that, like, your uh rational self-interest in terms of your love for your wife and what it would mean for your future well-being to have lost your wife. It's like you kind of, because I think in a very Misesian sense, right, uh to act in the world means, and we don't do this consciously all the time, but we to act in the world, we have to construct hierarchies of all the possible options we have, and that includes our values. Sometimes, like, we can have things we value, moral principles we value, but then when we act, we're kind of like, sometimes, we're implicitly choosing what we value more. So I can be in a situation where I'm saying, hey, the NAP is still objectively true, but I subjectively valued saving my wife's life over adhering to the NAP. But I'm going to accept that I broke the NAP. So what do you make of that?
So I think there are some bad premises baked in there, namely that, like, principles are something that you can, choose and weigh and value, that they're in some way, there can be a principle which would overrule the NEP because you subjectively value it high or whatever. Um, that's not the position that principles have. If it's a true principle, then what that means is that for you to identify and pursue objective values means that you have to adhere to that principle. So it destroys your entire hierarchy of values right there and then if you violate the principle, because then you just devolve into whim worship. Then you just devolve into might makes right. I feel like doing this, so I'm going to do it. And then, in no sense, are you actually pursuing objective values any longer. You're just living as an animal. So, I mean, you're entirely correct that when you get, I seem to be doing this thing of, like, when you really think deeply about these scenarios, these reductio cases, that it's like, well, actually there are these ways out. And some people might think that this is sort of a cop out, but it's really not. When you get to such an uncomfortable reductio, what that means, the reason why you're feeling uncomfortable is because you have cognitive dissonance. That tells you something. That tells you that you need to go back, check your premises, and see what's going on here. So for these reduction cases, you basically have two options. Either you say, well, I guess principles are gone. I'm not going to be principled anymore, and I'm just going to, be driven by this cognitive dissonance. Whenever I feel that, I'm just going to go let it drive me and just obey my whims. Right? I'm going to obey my whims and just select whichever one sounds better for me out of no principles at all. Okay, well then you've destroyed philosophy itself at that point. So there's no speaking to anymore. Or your other choice is you go back and you see, okay, well then let's really carefully think through the scenario and see how the principles apply. Maybe the principle was wrong. Let's go back and check the principle. No, I don't see any mistakes there. Okay, then let's really think about this scenario. For instance, with Haman's one with the child in the burning house. Well, let's think about the premises implicit there. Well, there's the premise that it would indeed be trespassing to go in and save that child. Well, that's not clear, right? And as it turns out, when you have a fully worked out theory of child's rights, and when you really, and a seemingly completely unrelated thing, which is the donut homestead, right? That seems completely, why would any libertarian care about thinking about that for more than 3 seconds? Like, it seems like such a silly scenario to think about, like which shape you're allowed to homestead your house in. But as it turns out, it applies completely here, because that gives you the general principle, which is that forestalling is a crime. And when you look at the case of the child in the burning house, you notice, well, this is actually another application of this forestalling principle. because we already worked it out for the case of donut homesteads, and we worked out that, as it turns out, that's forestalling. You can't control something which you don't own. That's a crime, which is actually a more general version of the crime of theft, right? As it turns out, it applies here as well. And yeah, indeed, when you're caught in like the heat of the moment in certain situations, you might end up violating your principles. But that's why principles are so important in the first place, right? So that you can recall them at an instant, and you can know how to follow your philosophy, even in life or death scenarios. That's when your principles are the most important.
Oh yeah,
In
yeah,
fact,
I agree. I think in general, so there's two things there. One, I think just like any libertarian who, maybe this isn't for you because you live in a country where you probably can't do this, but for us who live in countries where we actually are at least still allowed to arm ourselves with pew-pews, and walk around with them concealed, or at least we're legally allowed. I won't speculate what some of you might do in terms of even if the law says not to do something, you might do it anyway. I know there's some of you out there like that, but for terms of service purposes, we'll talk about those of us who are legally allowed to do that. I live in Pennsylvania, and this is a concealed carry state. And once I started doing that, I said, self-defense is absolutely right, but there are, like, just putting a gun in your belt and then just being like, all right, I'm prepared now. Like, no, like that does not, like, you need to actually think through, well, if I'm going to pull out this force multiplier, I need to be able to know I can wield it competently and know, like, what are situations where I'm actually warranted to pull out and brandish this weapon? And then beyond just brandishing it, what are the scenarios where I'm actually allowed to pull the trigger? You need to actually put a lot of thought ahead of time into thinking about that, because otherwise, like, just because you have a right to self-defense, and some libertarians will hear this and get like a little bit triggered by it when I say it, but I'm just like the right to self-defense is absolutely a right. The right to own a firearm is absolutely a fundamental right. Uh, but there is sometimes this like oversimplistic view of how that works out. And you especially first of all, because of how screwed up the legal system here is in America, you now have an extra layer of not just what is actually justified, but also, what do I have to do to make sure I don't end up locked in jail for life for defending myself in this, mafia that's ruling over me? But all that's kind of an example to what you're saying, which is that this is this is why philosophy, this is why these conversations matter. Which I've always said that, right? And as much as I might agree with things like Dave and others where they say, I'm very much concerned with trying to advance liberty in the real world, with trying to make real world differences and impacts. And I am sometimes worried about libertarians who their theory seems to lead to something like a paralysis of action, where it's like, we can't do anything. But that's not to say that then we abandon we need the principle. We have to think these things out very deeply, because they are informative for how we're supposed to act in the world. But as you said, there can be situations where people have failed to do that, and I guess you would say that for someone who, in the heat of the moment, violated the nap, but maybe like they come to their senses afterwards, and then they're like, "Oh crap, I committed an aggression." Um, I think your concern is that you don't want to provide cover for, because you almost created a counter reductio to this. You're just like, oh, it's not just good enough to say, oh, the nap's always objective, and maybe there's a situation where I commit an aggression, and then it's just okay because, like, I'm going to accept I committed aggression and pay the penalty. And you're like, well, hold on, like that can easily, we can do a reductio for that and just be like, what if I just go kill a bunch of people and, and do all this awful stuff and just be like, oh, hold on, guys, you can't get mad at me because I just said it was a crime and I'm going to pay the price. But I guess I feel like there's a I get what you're saying about principles to some extent. I think there's like a value hierarchy of, like, we value our principles, then we value the people in our lives, and we value our comfort. We value yeah, there's all sorts of things we value, and it's I feel like there's perhaps maybe two ships passing here, where what I'm trying to describe is not how we do philosophy, but just how people think about things. And that in the moment, even though, you know, you're an ANCAP and you value the nap, that doesn't mean that every moment in your life you're cognitively making every decision in that framework, especially in emergency situations where adrenaline kicks in and fight or flight kicks in, and sort of like, especially, if you believe in things like maternal instincts and parental instincts to protect your children and things like that. Those things can you know very quickly shift, even if you've done all the work about thinking about the philosophy ahead of time.
Yeah, so like there is an important concept to bring up here, which is the difference between the distinction between mens rea and actus reus. So these are legal terms. So mens
Yes.
rea means guilty mind, and actus reus means guilty act. So if you truly are in a situation, and people try to argue this in court sometimes, where it's like, no, I wasn't even thinking. Like it was just uh, heat of the moment type of thing. I wasn't thinking about anything. And, there's a type of like training they do for soldiers, like Skinnerian conditioning, where they will literally like that's why they have like the target pop up and they got to instantly shoot because
Yeah.
what it does is it drains it into your muscle memory. So before you can even consider whether or not you want to shoot this person, you've already shot them, and it's like, okay, well, I did commit a guilty act there, sure, um, but actually I lack mens rea because I wasn't deliberately trying to do this thing. It's just like almost a conditioned response or like a fight or flight response. Like this was just my lizard brain just kicked in for a second, and I did commit a guilty act there. So I apologize, and I'll try and make restitution. But there is no proper retribution here. So really, all philosophy can ever do is to make sure that you don't have mens rea when you're committing aggressions. It's literally by definition impossible to ever ensure that you never commit an aggression without mens rea. That's it's possible for man. Now, definitely that doesn't give you an excuse, right? It doesn't give you an excuse to be negligent, because after a while, there's a certain point of negligence where it's like, I'm going to try and trick the system here, where I'm going to be a
Yeah.
bumbling fool. I'm going to bumble my way into such a situation where suddenly fight or flight kicked in. Sorry, guys, but then you did plan for it the whole time. You're planning
Yeah.
for something bad to happen there, so then you do still have mens rea. So this isn't just like a get out of jail free card, as it were.
Yeah. No, I think I would mostly agree with that. And uh there are, and like, I think this was, so like, I had brought up examples uh in I think it was in my stream with Dave, but there might have been other places too where in the Discord chat it gets fuzzy in my brain now. But I brought up, like, in the Bible there are, there's actually an example once where David, when he's on the run from Saul, steals this bread from that belonged to the priests, and it actually technically, in a sense, belonged to God. And he lies about why he's stealing it, and the priest kind of like realizes he's lying and like gives it to him, but it's really not his to give based on like Levitical law. Uh, but God like shows mercy on him on that point, and like that was like an example of like what I was getting at, which was that now like the Bible doesn't say that, like, well, well, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. One, it could be like it was theft and God just decided to show mercy and not punish David for that. Or I guess there's another way you could read it where you could say, well, maybe David went to go steal it, but then did like what happens in Les Mis, where he's just like retroactively like, well, you came in here wanting to steal it, but like I'm just gonna let you take it. Which I guess is maybe a little bit of a gray area there, um, but yeah, I definitely think that I think we're mostly on the same page there on terms of just like it. We can imagine these emergency scenarios where, yeah, there's a difference between people who have this guilty mind versus guilty action. We don't want to let that be something that gets weaponized and abused, uh, but that uh, it would be wrong to go from saying someone can commit a crime in the moment and then make recompense for it, and we can kind of like understand extenuating circumstances. There are people who use that. I think this is to the larger point of what's going on in the movement, who then kind of use that and be like, oh, well, once I found this, like, 0.000000001% of the time where the NAP doesn't apply, now I can justify all my NAP violations in, everything I'm advocating for, which I think is what you're trying to push back against, and I'm largely in agreement with you there.
Yeah, because literally this happens every single time in the history of philosophy, where somebody comes along and tries to destroy a principle, a strongly held, widely accepted principle. People just go to the fucking works with that. It's like, oh, goody, finally, I get my one exception to the NEP, or finally, yes, I don't have to, justify my my whims with logic anymore. Or yeah, as it turns out, I get to just be a total skeptic, and then I can do whatever the hell I want, and then who cares? Like, people love, they have something that they really want to do. I think a lot of people just really want to commit aggression. They want to have their own little pet projects done by the government, and they are just, salivating at the chance. Like, oh, actually, there's just this one exception to the NEP, and once they get that through, if you grant them just this once, we're going to allow this contradiction in. If you give them just that one contradiction, as it turns out, the principle of explosion takes over, and they can justify whatever the fuck they want from that one little contradiction. If you have a contradiction, like this is true, right? You can literally prove whatever the hell you want with a contradiction. So you can never. That's why I'm very strongly opposed to this type of thing. I make sure to never, ever, ever let them have that. Okay, fine. In this crazy situation, blah 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 blah. Then sure, the NEP no longer applies. They'll take your neck the second you say that to them. They'll go, fucking great. Now I got to be a goblin and run around stabbing people, and nothing matters anymore. And it's a very short step for them to actually get there.
Right. Or, it's a very short step from like, oh, I can steal the ladder to save my grandmother. Okay. And now I can use ICE to,
Yeah.
create a police state in America. So yeah, there's definitely an issue there. I'm trying to find, because now we're about an hour in. I wanted to move to the donut homesteading, and I wanted to bring. I'm trying to find our next. I got into this with Ace back and forth, and I had actually created this little I had taken like your image. Here we go. I found it right here. So I'm gonna screen share here. Because I had not I read like the basics of your course. I hadn't gotten to or I think I might have like read over the donut homesteading stuff, but like it just I don't think I interrogated it very hardly. I had always, not using your language, I had always sort of just solved that by saying like, well, you can't imprison someone, and a donut homestead is basically like imprisoning someone. So it just seemed to me to be like, well, that would just so obviously be aggression. Now, I was on the stream with Dave, and I got into it. He brought up an objection that made me think about it a little bit more, in terms of just like I was like, well, am I actually forestalling you? Am I actually imprisoning you? Am I just saying, no, you can't go on my property? And then, so I kind of like, well, I got to think about this more, because this is more complicated than I initially thought. And so I was going back and forth with mostly Ace then about this, and but I thought it'd be better to, since you're the one who kind of originated, especially I think this argument, to have you
It
come
actually
up.
comes from Łukasz Dominiak, to be clear.
Okay. But I guess like to steelman the argument, like and he was trying to put it in this way where it's almost like that there's like a contradiction. That basically saying that if you allow the donut homestead, what you're essentially saying is that so let me do the screen share here, because it'll make more sense, I think, with the having the image up for us to so share screen. I'm gonna go to X here. Blow that up. So essentially, we have person called X here, and we're saying that if B is saying get off my property, and A is saying you're not allowed on my property, Ace's argument, and you can let me know if you agree with this or if you would put it differently, was that what this is resulting in is that person X is being told that he has like he ought not trespass and that he ought trespass. That like he ought not go on A and he ought go on A, or that he ought not be on B, but he ought stay on B, and that this is contradictory and it can't be. And so that's how he says, that's how he was arguing it to me, that therefore, uh, this, well, I guess like it's a contradiction. And so therefore, from it being a contradiction, it then follows that uh, it would be illegitimate for A to forestall X from leaving B to go to C. So what would you add to that if there's anything you think is missing?
So yeah, this is basically the opposite way around from the way that Dominiac puts it. I still think this is a valid argument. But if we imagine, let's just take it back to the original argument real quick. So basically, if you imagine that the donut hasn't been homesteaded yet, and then somebody comes in and they try to homestead that ring, that A ring. So, and then the assumption is that they only homestead the ring, they don't homestead the donut hole B. So then, if some person comes along and they want to enter, well, they are allowed to enter B because nobody owns B. Okay, but entering B implies entering A, so they don't have a right, but they don't have a right to enter A. So they have a duty. So they have a duty not to enter B because it implies entering A, and they don't have such a duty because nobody owns B, so they don't have a duty to not enter B. So this is just a straight up contradiction here. So how do we resolve that contradiction? We go, what was the initial premise? The initial premise was that they homesteaded only A, but not B. Right, that's actually incorrect. And you get this from embordering. This is why embordering is valid, or Day says let exclusion stand principle. Same thing. So when you homestead A, by doing that, you are excluding people from B. So you actually homestead both the donut and the donut hole. It's not possible to just homestead the donut without homesteading the donut hole. So let's take that into the situation of the one you're posing here. Again, the contradiction still stands. If we were to assume that this happens, how would this have come about? Well, first somebody would have to homestead B, and then somebody would have to come along and homestead an entire ring around B. But wait a minute, that's when the contradiction gets introduced. So they're not able to homestead the entire ring around B. They have to have what? They have to have some sort of an easement to get out of B, or else this exact contradiction arises. Or maybe, right, somebody tried to homestead B after A had been homesteaded. We've gone over how it's actually not possible to homestead only A and not B. That's not possible to do that. And it's also, by the way, not possible to homestead the entire thing and then just trade out that bit in the middle. Because what is a trade? It means that you have simultaneous abandonment and homesteading. But the person who homesteaded A, they haven't actually abandoned B yet, right? Because they're still excluding people from B. So they're still in possession of that thing, which they're supposed to have abandoned. So that's not possible. And so yeah, I just don't think this arrangement can come about in the first place.
Well, I think it's hard to, again, like the reductio thing we talked about, like there's always kind of these even easier ways around it. Because like I've always said, well, if A actually went to homestead around B, unless we've invented like the Star Trek replicator and he just replicates all at once, this like giant like homesteaded wall around B, that like it takes time to build things. And so either it'd be kind of silly to imagine B sitting there just like watching his property get slowly enclosed and doesn't think to like,
maybe they did the Springfield Dome over top of him.
Yeah, right. So it's on that point it's a little silly. It's also most likely that B already has a path that he homesteaded to C, and A could like it would, and so realistically it would almost be like if you imagined A was everything except like this one line that was just the path that B had already homesteaded, and maybe he was like, "Fine, homestead around my path, but you can't have my path because obviously I need
Mhm.
it." Right? That's probably how it most likely works out in the real world anyway. But in terms of just the reductio, I guess where I'm getting tripped up is this whole thing of forestalling. Now, when I think about forestalling, I think about it. Let's establish it in a very easy, non-controversial, non-reductio. Uh, I 100% agree that one of the worst things that the government does, not just on immigration policy, but just even to the domestic population, is it forestalls the ability for anyone to go and homestead unhomesteaded land here in America, but probably governments do this all over the world as well. And this had come up a lot in like the conversations about immigration, of course, because it's just like, well, uh, letting people come here and then they're a drain on public property. It's like, well, it wouldn't have to be a drain on public property if the government didn't forestall them from going and homesteading, which they do to
Mm.
everybody. And so that's kind of like the most obvious real world example of forestalling is that like you get this, and it's also like when the left talks about these rich corporations like buying up all the houses and all the land. It's like, yeah, that's kind of because the government's forestalling people from either homesteading abandoned property or homesteading completely, fresh, never homesteaded property to begin with. And that's one of the major distortions we have in the market right now. Um, so that when I think about forestalling, I think about it in that context that like if you could imagine that like there's this empty field out in the middle of like Kansas and I go to try to homestead it, but the government then comes in with armed men and says like you're not allowed to be here, right? Or they had armed men there to begin with, like, or that they have like signs out and they're just like, hey, we didn't homestead this land, but this is our land by fiat and you can't be on
Mm.
it. Or sometimes what happens is they claim the land by fiat and then they will, like sell it to like a bank or some kind of, the state government or the local, etc. But it's not done through what we would kind of call like, legitimate, uh, Austrian homesteading principles. So there's different ways that this happens, but it all results in there's tons of property that no one's living in, that no one has legitimately acquired through title transfer, or there's just empty land that's unhomesteaded and people aren't allowed to go homestead it, which is just crazy. There's no libertarian justification for that. This situation, I guess I'm having a harder time seeing the forestalling principle at play. But is there anything you want to add to my before we jump into that? Is there anything you think I missed there in terms of just the general forestalling? I mean, it's the technical thing. I think is that like stopping people from entering something that you don't own, I guess, is the technical.
So I would say it's more general than that. I would say forestalling in general just means that you're controlling something which you don't own.
Okay, yeah,
So that would definitely apply in cases where the state says, no, you're not allowed to homestead there because they don't own it. But if you try and do anything with respect to it, they're excluding you, right, from something that they don't actually own yet. So they're exercising it as if they own that thing when they don't own that thing, and this leads to a litany of contradictions if you allow that type of thing to happen.
yeah. By the way, just real quick, Son of Clay. Uh, I have been taking advantage of StreamYard's and YouTube's new feature where they have vertical live streams. But yeah, if it's not solo and there's two people, it does look kind of janky. I just do that because it's two different live stream feeds, and people going through shorts can now find this stream more easily. But you don't have to watch it on here. If you just want to like hop off this stream and just go to my channel, you can find the widescreen live stream and watch it on a normal fashion. It'll look better. So I uh, just been trying to take advantage of because I've noticed if I do that, more people can find the stream that way and find the channel. So anyway, so I agree with what you're saying about what the definition of forestalling is. So in this scenario, I guess I see on one hand how you could say it's forestalling. but I guess you'd have to admit that that there's an extra element here that makes this, like, at least, I'm not saying it's mental gymnastics, but like there's one additional step here that has to be analyzed, which is that there is legitimately homesteaded property in this equation. And so we would agree, of course, that A has the right to exclude from his property in a general sense, and that insofar as he's just stopping people from entering his property, that that's just his normal property right being expressed there. Um, but I guess what you're saying is that he's almost doing two things. He's saying you can't come on my property and you can't go to this property behind me, I guess is
Mhm.
the claim that's being made.
Yeah, because if you look at this from X's perspective, because he's actually forestalling in both directions. So from X's perspective, person who homesteaded A is acting as if he's the owner of all of C, because he's excluding X from C. Now, from somebody who's somewhere out there in the world in C, the homesteader of A is excluding them from B. So he's acting as if he's the owner of B. So in both ways, he's acting as if he owns something which he doesn't own. Which again, this is just the general principle behind why theft is bad. Because if you allow this, you can no longer avoid conflicts. You get contradictions. Like the whole property theory just immediately falls apart if you allow this type of thing to occur.
I think and I have some of this written here, but I think that this was more into Ace's response, so it's stated differently. But where I'm getting tripped up with this is that it occurs to me that to say he is preventing people from going on to C is sort of saying that this is a consequence of what he's doing when he's enforcing his property right. And so to me, it kind of seems like that there's a bit of a leap there, because in actuality, he, in terms of what he's physically doing, like he's not out there. For example, if we imagine person Y is out here on C, I don't have a person C there, but like if we just imagine there's person Y out there, well, A's not acting like he owns C in relation to person Y. Uh, he's just saying to person X, he's like, listen, I like, I don't care what you do. I don't care about you being here on B. I don't care about you being here on C. But why do I have to provide to you? Why am I being obligated? To me, the concern here is a slippery slope to positive rights or positive obligations. Why should I extend to you some kind of like positive obligation that like I need to give you access to see? That's not my job. That
Well,
you
it was it's actually a still negative rights. The instant that A, or the person who owns A, went about and sealed off that last brick in the wall and had sealed up the donut, that instant they committed an aggression. Like it's not a positive obligation to undo that aggression, to let people past, right? It's as if I were to come along and I were to just whilst you're streaming there, I just walked over and took your camera, and I just started walking off with your camera, and you're like, hey, give me back my fucking camera, and it's like, what? So now I've got some positive obligation to give you this camera back? Like, come on, man, what are we, communists? It's like no, I committed the aggression when I took it, so I have to undo that aggression.
No, so
And
I agree with you there. So what we have to establish is that A has aggressed by creating the donut in the first place. So that's something that didn't quite come up in Aces and I back and forth. So that is a better argument. So I guess what we have to establish is it an aggression? So you're saying it's an aggression. Well, just restate it for me. Why just so I can completely follow it, make sure I understand why when A puts that last brick in, he's committed an aggression.
so there are two possibilities here, right? Just by logic, either that is aggressive, and therefore it's disallowed by the property theory, or it's non-aggressive, in which case it's allowed by the property theory. The latter option leaves us in a situation where we have a contradiction, and conflicts cannot be avoided any longer. What do we know about contradictions? We know contradictions are not true. So if we arrive at a contradiction then we know that we messed up somewhere. Where
And
did
then,
we
and
mess
so
up? We messed up with the assumption that this is a valid property arrangement. So in fact, the opposite must be true. It must be aggression. It must
so
be disallowed.
so then the contradiction, just to make sure I'm following this, is that he's put, I guess, like, forget about person X, he's put person B, who owns B, in a position of, or I guess he would say it's X, I don't know. Explain to me the contradiction, whether it's in this scenario or just in the original, forgetting person X, like where's because I guess you're saying when he builds A, he's aggressing against B and creating a contradiction. So can you draw that contradiction again for me, please?
Sure. So let me just read out from the original paper. He uses like colors. So I think let's see here. It's blah 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 blah. Let me just
I saw you
make
shared it
sure I've
with
got
me. Which page is it?
It's page 6, 7, so 120 in like the actual paper, because it's in a whole like binder, of course. But it's page 7 of this PDF. So we're talking about red and blue. Red has a right toward blue, that blue not do X if and only if blue has a duty toward red not to do X. In the bagel case, the following conclusions must therefore be true. 1. Because red is not the owner of B, therefore does not have any rights to B. Blue, by definition, cannot have any correlative duties towards red in connection with B. 2. Because blue has no correlative duties towards red in connection with B, blue also has no duty towards red to not enter B, sorry. But because red is the owner of A, blue has all correlative duties towards red in connection with A. Because blue has all correlative duties towards red in connection with A, blue also has a duty toward red to not enter A. Because blue has a duty toward red to not enter A, he therefore has a duty towards red to not cross A. Because of the bagel shape of the land, to cross A is to enter B. Because blue has a duty toward red to not cross A, and to cross A is to enter B, blue has a duty toward red to not enter B, which contradicts number 2. Now, again, I don't see which premise is incorrect here. It seems like a pretty clear contradiction here.
All right, let me go through this on my own quick. So because red is not the owner of B and therefore does not have any rights to B, blue by definition cannot have any correlative duties towards red in connection to B. I wish there was a correlating picture to this. So
there is
red
right
doesn't,
above. So blue, I
right here.
believe, is the guy who's somewhere in C, and red owns A, only A.
Okay. Red is not the owner of B and therefore does not have any rights to B. Blue, by definition, cannot have any correlative duties towards red in connection with B. Because blue has no correlative duties towards red in connection with B, blue also has no duty toward red to not enter B. Yeah, no, I might have to chew on this and get back to you on it because I'm just having to scroll back up and down and looking at this as a little. So red is, sorry. Let me read this out. Ask, what does all mean for red and blue's property rights? Who is red and blue again? So red owns.
Red owns A, and blue is somewhere in C. Blue is the only. Yeah, it says above there. So assume red owns this bagel-shaped plot called A. B is an unappropriated hole in the bagel plot of land, and blue is the owner of the plot of land C outside the bagel.
Okay, so we're saying B is, no one's in B, and
Yeah, nobody's in B.
nobody's in B. Red owns A, and blue, I guess, owns C and wants to go to.
Or just some sort of property in C somewhere. Not
Okay.
necessarily all of C.
outside of the bagel. And so because red is not the owner of the bee and therefore does not have any rights to be, blue by definition cannot have any correlative duties towards red in connection with B. I'm not understanding that line just initially here. Does it mean that?
So,
Go ahead.
let's look at this. So, because red is not the owner of B, right, the B being the donut hole, and therefore does not have any rights to B, that is, he doesn't own it, so he doesn't have rights to it. And you define these terms earlier in the paper, but we all get the basics at least. So blue by definition cannot have any correlative duties towards red in connection with B. So let's unpack that. So what that means is the guy blue who's out there somewhere in C, well, he doesn't have to actually ask red's permission, anything to do with B. Right? He has no duty towards red to not enter B, for instance.
Yes. I got you. And so then because blue has no correlative duties toward red in connection with B, blue has no duty toward red not to enter B. Okay, that makes sense. So basically the first two premises I have no disagreement with. If A is saying I just own, so red is saying I own A, I don't own B, that means he doesn't have any right to tell any person out here that, like, no person here is like, oh, I need A's permission, or I need red's permission to go to B. That would be, just that would be if you need to ask someone's permission to use something, then by definition they pretty much own it.
Exactly.
Or
agents of the owner. Somebody has to own this thing.
Right, exactly. Or they're just aggressing, right? They could not own it, and they're like, oh, you need our permission, and maybe they're just pirates.
Like the government saying you're not allowed to like homestead out in the middle of Kansas. Like they don't own that. That's why it's forestalling.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So 1 and 2, I'm completely in agreement with. I think red is the owner of A. Blue has all correlative duties toward red in connection. So that makes sense. That's just, so now I know what he means by correlative duty. He's basically saying that, well, red does own A, so blue does have this duty to not trespass on A, which is owned by red. That's what that means. Okay. And so because he has these duties towards red in connection with A, blue also has the duty to not enter A. It's kind of repetitive, I get it. Blue has a duty towards red to not enter A, and therefore he has a duty to not cross A. And because of the bagel shape of the land, to cross A is to enter B, and so because of the blue has a duty toward red to not cross A, and to cross A is to enter B, blue has a duty toward red to not enter B, which contradicts 2. So basically he's saying that in effect, so I think this is getting toward what I was saying before. There's still this, and maybe this is my own deficiency here, but I'm trying to make it make sense in my head, because I get the premise. Like, if it just to steel man it again, what he's saying is that let me scroll back up here. He's saying because red owns A, doesn't have any right to exclude from B, blue here out in C he's being put in a position where he simultaneously cannot trespass on A, but if he wants to enter B, he has to trespass on A. But if red doesn't own B, he has no right to stop him from going here. So I think that's what you're saying. The contradiction is that he's simultaneously saying, I have no, like, you have no duty to me not enter B, but then also kind of simultaneously saying you can't enter B. But I feel like, and maybe this is my own philosophical shortcoming here. What he's really saying is, I think going back even to the other example of that I was talking to Ace about, like, he's just saying, I don't have any positive obligation for you to go to help you go to B, right? Because, like, presumably in this scenario, he's not like saying, listen, like, you get in a helicopter and you get, drop shipped down into B, then by all means, like, I don't care, right? Or, dig a tunnel that doesn't affect my property in any way, then, I presumably don't care. Paul, Paul, do the what was the Olympic event with the pole, like the pole vault, like do a pole vault over my property into B. I don't. So it doesn't seem to me like he's exercising, perhaps in some measure, you could say, a kind of barrier that makes it harder to get to B, but I don't know that he's acting as like the he's not claiming full exclusive control over B, because he's not like, if someone made it to B without getting through A, he's not gonna sit there and be like, whoa, hold on now. That's my, so that's where I think my disconnect with this is.
So let's imagine instead, he's got down in his basement, right down in this guy's basement. He's completely sealed off from every angle, and he says, "Hey, this apple, this one little patch in the middle of my basement, I don't own that. I don't own that. Anybody's allowed to get there if they want." Well, as it turns out, it's impossible to get there without going onto this person's property, because they've completely surrounded it in every single direction. So if he truly is saying anybody's allowed to get there and homestead that if they want to, but to get there and homestead that implies going on this guy's property, right? It's a straight logical implication, because it's impossible to get there otherwise. Well, then we've got the same problem here, right? We still have that contradiction arising, and that's the main thing I want to get right now, is to just get the fact that this is a real thing which can happen, that you can have this situation of forestalling with a donut homestead, and then we can start abstracting out and breaking down to like, okay, well, why would it matter in the case where, in this situation you could get a helicopter or whatever, because I think it still does apply here, but like I just want to get like the principle across first.
So what you're saying, like, there's something in his basement that he's saying is not mine, but now there's literally no way to get to it without, because at that point, even if you dug all, so yeah, I think in that instance, that would be a contradiction, because you're basically saying that, like, like this apple isn't mine, anyone can have it, but I mean, I think in reality we would say, well, like, I mean, either you stole it or it is your apple, right? If you stole it, it's not yours. And not only should you return it, but like if it was just but that doesn't even, it's a little silly, because it's just like, I guess if you stole it from a market, then it's just stolen property and no one should be able to homestead it. But like if you were saying it's like, this is an unowned apple that I picked from an apple tree and it's in my house, but it's not mine. That just seems like, how did it not be yours? You picked it. Like that. So I mean, there's contradictions all over the place, I think, with that analogy that I think are very clear.
Yeah. So then let's take it back to this scenario where it's like, well, maybe you could get a helicopter and go into the middle of B. So let's talk about what it actually means to exclude someone from something. It doesn't mean it's impossible to get there, right? Because it's definitely possible to, get through this guy's house and get down into his basement and get there. But you are still being excluded, because you are faced with certain economic costs. There are objective barriers in front of you that anybody can see, and you have to overcome those barriers. Now, yeah, it's definitely possible to overcome those barriers, but let's just look at this from the perspective of somebody who's just walking along and sees this big circular-shaped property. They don't bloody well know that there's like a donut hole in the middle, and they have no way to find this out, right? Unless they were to climb over the fence and go to the middle and go like, hey, wait a minute, there's a fucking unhomesteaded plot in here. So what this effectively is he is excluding people from this donut hole, but he's by fiat saying that he doesn't own it. So, okay, well, that's a problem, because fiat property, it makes it impossible to avoid conflicts. Because then anytime I go to anybody's property, it's like, well, maybe somewhere in there's some unhomesteaded land which I can get to. And, when you actually because it's impossible to discover that from the outside, you can't avoid conflicts. And this is why, by the way, that you can't homestead something in such a way that it's literally completely untouched, where it's impossible for anybody to tell that anything's happened there.
Right. Yeah.
Because
No, I agree
I
with
have
that.
I have to be able to come along later and tell that somebody is excluding people from this thing, that somebody owns this thing, or else I can't avoid conflicts over it.
Right. That's like my whole thing with. And I guess it gets a little messy, like because I think even like it needs to be. If I like went up to imagine like a world where we didn't have nation states, I just went up to like the North Pole, and I was just like, I just put a flag that says biblical anarchy on the North Pole. I was just like, I'm on the top of the world, and I just put this pole here. I've homesteaded the entire Antarctica. Right? It'd be like, I don't know, maybe I homesteaded the little bit of ice that I put the pole in, but like, like and like same with like here, like in the States, like when people will be like, well, the government put a sign in that said like, hey, this sign is here to tell you that we own all this land and you can't homestead here. It's like there's no legitimate means of
You
there's
could
no
walk for days without ever seeing that sign.
right, yeah. So yeah, so I agree with you there. I guess I still think because like I get what you're saying that like there's a barrier that like it's harder, but I still don't know that that's so like on one hand, there's two ways to go here because you could do it with if they homesteaded it around a person. I think that presents different issues, but if they homestead around something unowned and then they're claiming to not own it, but then it's kind of like how would people know about it? But is there like I mean, is that a right that people have to know that there's something there to be homesteaded? I mean, presumably there's all sorts of things we don't know that exist that like we could, not just in terms of homesteading land, but like there's probably minerals under my house you can't see.
Well,
Probably not me, but like there's probably minerals under someone's house that they can't see that like,
mm,
now it's just like so they're kind of being forestalled. So that's my worry there that there might be a certain slippery slope there to be like, are we creating some kind of positive obligation to be like, if I homestead something, now I'm obligated to be like, well, I got to make sure everyone knows what's under my house and behind
the,
it and
so I want to be clear. When Red goes in and he homesteads that donut, I think the solution to this is that he actually homesteaded the donut and the donut hole, because he's excluding people from the donut hole as well, which I think establishes he's got this objective border there. Whatever the hell he says, he does own that donut hole. And so let's sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, sorry, I completely forgot what I was going to say.
it's fine. Well, because you said, yeah, he de facto owns the donut hole if he homesteads around it. But I guess my worry was that you were saying that if he was saying he doesn't own it, he's forestalling people because they might not
Yes,
know it exists.
I remember.
Yeah.
So this is linked to another thing where, Walter Block, he thinks that voluntary slavery is a thing which can happen. Now, I disagree with him completely, where basically you sell yourself into slavery. Why do I think this is impossible? Because I don't think it's possible to actually abandon yourself in the first place. So I think for you to be able to sell something, it has to be alienable. So in the case of like, this donut hole scenario, he's finished off that fence, and the second he does that, he has indeed actually homesteaded the middle. So how would he get into a situation where he no longer owns the middle? Well, he'd have to abandon it, but he's abandoning it whilst still possessing it. It'd be like me saying, I want to abandon my body, or I want to abandon just my heart. Right? It's like, actually, no, I'm not actually able to abandon my heart unless I get a surgeon to cut out of me, right? And then the instant, they amputate my arm or cut out part of my liver, yeah, the instant that comes out of my body and it has actually become alienable, then yeah, I can sell it or whatever. But not until then. Up until that point, I'm still controlling that thing. I'm still excluding people from that thing. So yeah, that's what needs to be really thought about here. Is that if you're still controlling that thing, it's not about giving a positive obligation so that everybody knows, hey, by the way, guys, I no longer own my heart. Anybody's allowed to come along and homestead it. It's not about that. It's that me saying I no longer own my heart it doesn't establish anything, because that's a completely arbitrary fiat arrangement of property. Me just saying I no longer own my heart, I've abandoned my heart. Well, that doesn't actually establish anything, because what if you speak Spanish? What if you don't speak English? You don't know what the fuck I'm saying. I might as well just be speaking gibberish, right? So I actually have to make it objectively clear, rip out my heart and throw it on the ground, and then start walking away. And it's like, okay, well, that guy's fucking, I guess he doesn't want it anymore.
Also, how's he walking away without a heart? But beyond that, but but yeah. So what you're saying is, in the unowned donut hole scenario, he just basically does own it effectively, because
Yeah.
he can't, in the same way that like I can't say I don't own my heart, he can't say he doesn't own the donut hole. I guess I see what you're getting at. I don't think it's unreasonable. I just don't know that I don't know that I'm convinced thoroughly that it's so ironclad that there can't be little holes in terms of what people might try to pick apart there. Because yeah, because again, it's like, what if he, so like, again, we can go into all sorts of hypotheticals, right? And it could go all day. Like, cause like you could say he de facto owns it, but then like if someone did helicopter down into the middle of it, and then he's like, hey, congratulations, you've homesteaded the donut hole. Like, I mean, then it's like, well, I guess he didn't own it because he didn't exclude someone from getting it. And still that sort of like what level of, like, I guess my curiosity would be like, what threshold is this sort of like because like I agree with you that like you need to homestead something enough to actually show it's been homesteaded, but I don't think that the inverse of that then applies, that like if I homestead something, then in terms of the stuff I haven't homesteaded, I need to make sure I haven't provided a barrier to people getting there, because I kind of feel like that's a little, it feels a little muddy to me, because I'm just like, well, where's the threshold, right? Like, what is and what isn't a reasonable or objective? Actually, probably is a better question. Like, what's the objective threshold of when I have, gone from just inconveniencing people to make it harder to homestead a piece of property, versus now it's so inconvenient and it's so difficult that now it's aggression. That is where I guess I'd be curious if there's an answer to that.
So, this runs into the point Kinsella makes about the limits of armchair theorizing. As a jurist, I'm only able to give you the general principle that there is such a thing as forestalling, and it means when you're controlling something that you don't actually own. Now, I can explicate that in like simple scenarios and like highlight what the scenario is and why it arises. But really, ultimately, it ends up you have to kick it down to the judge to analyze actual situations of, this person is alleging that this other guy is forestalling some piece of property, right? And then I leave that to the judges. From my armchair, I'm
Okay.
not able to like rationalistically deduce every possible situation.
No, and that's fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's a general principle, but it would play out based upon facts on the ground that you just have to let local judges rule on if conflicts did arise. I think it's a fair enough answer for that. If it's unowned, I still think it's a little weird than if we imagine, again, the reductio the other way is even harder to imagine, because it's just harder to imagine someone owning B and just letting someone homestead A around them, either slowly and doing nothing, or all at once.
Yeah, and the reductio, like, it literally does become like, oh, well, if we don't have the blocking proviso, then I literally just I see you walking along the street, and I drop a cage over top of you. It's like, get fucked, asshole. You're mine now. It's like, 'cause you're not allowed to touch my cage. You're not allowed to touch it. It's like, okay,
But that's what I was
fuck?
trying to do. That's the example I was trying to give the Dave. Like, what if I just surround you with some rope and just be like, "Can't touch my rope," haha, and it's just like,
Yeah.
but with the property thing, I guess it's a little, it's not your person. I guess it is, but it's like by consequence your person. That when you don't at homestead around someone's property, and then you just tell them, you know, you can't, I get even that situation probably, I guess, is sort of like even if we imagine some scenario where that kind of happens, then you have to, I think it's still the same thing of the general principle applying, and then the local judge has to, rule on if something specific like that happens. But it can get, I think all, I mean, like so I do want to pivot a little bit because I think so. This is sort of like taking something that Dave and I kind of spent like a few minutes on, and now we've spent uh 45 minutes on the donut homestead and an hour and a half on this broader thing. But I think there's, again, and this will come out when you guys debate, but just in terms of where you and I stand, because I don't claim to just, I have my own mind, and I sympathize with Dave on some things, but I don't exactly just like parrot everything he says and agree with him. But I think to the extent where maybe there's two ships passing here is just the sort of uh, talking about philosophy and talking about things in more layman colloquial terms. And I'm very interested in learning about the philosophy just as much as I'm interested in learning about theology and about economics. As someone who does a podcast from more of a layman's perspective, and these deep dives are good, and I hope my audience and the LCI audience learns from it. Right? I think studying theory and the principle, getting into the weeds is good. I just also know that, like, this took, an hour and 40 minutes, and would have taken, if we didn't have a conversation, probably something of the equivalent of reading and back and forth dialoguing through other channels to get to some kind of understanding. And we, of course, need, that's why we do podcasts, right? Like, this is necessary work. I think to some extent there's a difference in focus and strategy here. For everything else that probably still needs to be talked about in terms of like the issues you and Dave have, I feel like where me and Dave align and differ from you slightly is that we do want to speak to the remnant. And I think you have a fair point that maybe, not maybe, that at least at times I will grant you that Dave and the Mises Caucus have, for not a good reason, taken shots at the remnant and drew first blood and put a wedge in spots that there shouldn't have been a wedge. So I'm going to grant you that, and that's completely legitimate. Uh, I think it's also fair to say that not everyone necessarily is going to make that like my sole job or my sole focus is going to be talking to the remnant, right? I think Dave and I still feel like, well, I won't speak for Dave. I feel like I want to speak to the remnant, but I also do want to try to appeal to the normies to some extent. And I don't know that those have to be in competition with each other, as long as I'm willing to not compromise on the principle, or even where I'm maybe not being as strong as the principle, I'm trying to, like, the way I treat you and I treat your audience and the people who are, I guess in the theory bro camp or whatever you want to call it. Uh, I try to extend goodwill and not take shots or anything. But I think sometimes it's like it's easier for the layman to just kind of be like, uh, it's not that we're saying the theory is bad. It's just like, as you just said, there's limits to what armchair theorizing can do, and you can always come up with scenarios where you go like, yeah, that's kind of a hard hypothetical, and you'd have to just kind of like actually be in that situation and know all the facts, and then trust judges on the ground to just make the right decisions. And maybe it doesn't always get worked out perfectly, because and something I brought up in our conversation, with my conversation with Dave, which I don't know if you caught and if you have any thoughts on, but I'm always wary of maybe like the opposite concern of abandoning principle is this sort of nirvana fallacy where it's like, libertarianism to be true must be able to accurately predict and solve every possible problem and human conflict that can ever arise, period. And if it doesn't, it fails. And I'm like, well, I don't know that that's reasonable, because life is complex and complicated. And maybe there are some situations where, like, you know, we can't even fathom, where it's like, wow, that's really tough. And we don't know what people would do. So I don't know, what's your thoughts on all that? There was a little bit of verbal diarrhea, but hopefully it made sense.
So yeah, let's think about what makes a normie. A normie, how do we define that? That's somebody who follows the norms, right? Just whatever the norms that they are, they're following those norms. So how do you appeal to a normie? Right? You would have to be in some way warping your ideology to fit in with the norms of the day. Now, that's why I say that if you're genuinely appealing to the normies, not just saying the philosophy in simpler terms, which I think is fine. Simplification is okay. But if you're actually appealing to normies, chasing normies, you have to necessarily be adulterating the theory. That's kind of my point with that, is that either you're being the salesman who's trying to get the normies on board, or you're being the radical and you're doing Isaiah's job. They are completely incompatible. They cannot go together.
So, I mean, maybe. I guess it just. I feel like there's ways to appeal to the normie where, like, put it this way: if I talk to someone at my church, which this happens all the time, that's why I'm using this example. I know that, like, man, we're gonna agree on Jesus and the gospel, and we it might take us 2 hours to find a political thing we might agree on, right? But then I'm like, well, what I don't know, what's most important? And for me, it often is war. And I do feel like, maybe to offer you just like a little bit of pushback. Like I get this from some libertarians where they're like, well, I don't really care about the conflict in Gaza because, like, don't drag me into it. It's none of my business. I just don't want to pay for it. And I guess it's kind of like, for me, my response to that is kind of like it's the people who say I don't care about politics. It's like, well, politics cares about you. And the conflicts in the Middle East, I think it does. Like, we understand, as not just libertarians, but as Austrians, the damage to freedom and to economic prosperity caused by central banks and fiat currency and all this money printing. Well, the one of the biggest things driving that is the warfare state. And the biggest driver for the warfare state is the propaganda. So it's kind of like, so even if it's like, even if you could listen, like you could like, be the, I'm doing like a caricature type here. Like you could be the most selfish bastard objectivist you could imagine and be like, I don't give, 2 Fs about the people living in this region. But like, I need to know what's going on there and argue against the propaganda, because that's part of rolling back this whole apparatus that's destroying the world, our society, right? So,
Yeah, I do think that is one legitimate reason. So I think there are legitimate reasons to care about the war in the Middle East, the many wars, right? The one legitimate reason would be like, you're in some way directly involved with it. Like, maybe you got family over there. Then yeah, clearly you're gonna care quite intimately about that. Now I another reason why I think it's legitimate for a lot of Americans to care about this, especially if they pay taxes, is because they're being robbed immense sums to blow up, brown people in the Middle East. Now, for me, the UK government isn't really as heavily involved in any sort of way as the American government is. The American government, they love their wars. So for me, I just really I have no care in the world about like the 10,000-year-old blood feud, which has been going on. I have nothing to say about that, really.
And I get that to a point, I mean, that could be another conversation, because I feel like, to some extent, as America goes, Europe, including the UK, also kind of goes. I mean, we went and fought in Iraq, and basically Tony Blair was just like, we're going to go fight in Iraq too, I guess, because we're going to do whatever America wants. So we'll drag you into stuff too, right? So it might behoove you to care a little bit, but we wouldn't have to focus on
sure.
that.
Absolutely.
I think,
Iraq, like, I completely understand why people were, upset at Tony Blair. That's perfectly legitimate as well.
Yeah. So like now the finer point I was trying to make here is that when I'm talking to someone at my church, then it's like, I have two angles, right? As a Christian, I want to be like, I need to make sure you're not like believing in some kind of like, Christian heresy that makes you think that we have to support Israel no matter what, right? And then it's going to be like, you know what, like, I might not be able to convince you to be an Austrian and to not want to, like, speaking of like biting bullets and being pure in the philosophy, after we're done here, which I'll have to go in like probably like 5 minutes or so. So I'll have to wrap up here, but I'm going to be doing a next space with LCI and the Christian Caucus, and it's going to be, should Christians support decriminalizing prostitution? Well, I'm gonna, for the next hour when we're done here, gonna be biting some of the hardest bullets that a Christian libertarian can bite, because that's like the thing that makes conservatives and Christians the most angry, is when I say, nope, we're not going to ban porn, we're not going to ban sex work, we're not going to ban prostitution, we're not going to ban heroin. Sorry. So all that's well and good, but I know I'm not going to persuade a whole lot of people on that when I'm biting those bullets necessarily, especially in like those layman normie conversations. But it's like, okay, maybe I can at least convince you to like stop supporting policies and politicians that tell us we need to be endlessly supporting these foreign entanglements, which is a domino that needs to be knocked down to start knocking down the rest of these dominoes in terms of this entire warfare empire, domestic tyranny apparatus that America and the West are broadly inculcated with. And so that's why, I guess kind of like this, harkening back to the debate you had with Dan, is like the anti-war stuff I think matters so much. And and maybe from your perspective, you would just, say, well, Dave's not a libertarian. I'm just not going to be convinced he's a libertarian. I think he's a pragmatist. I think he's abandoned his principle and all that. And you guys are going to have that debate. But I think there's something to at least libertarians like me and others who are going to not try to like say, we're not going to try to contradict libertarianism, but we're going to try to reach normies. And sometimes when we're doing that, we're going to take shortcuts around the harder parts of the theory, where it's like, hey, instead of getting bogged down here for 2 hours on this thing that's kind of like you're not going to care about until you have accepted the theory, let me at least convince you on like this first most important point, which is like, let's stop spending trillions of dollars to bomb brown kids halfway across the world. But give me your reaction to that, and then we'll close out here.
For sure. I mean, yeah, so long as you aren't contradicting the theory, I think it's fine. It's fine to, I wouldn't necessarily call them normies. I mean, talk to the median voter, and you'll really quickly calibrate exactly how normie a person can get. Like they can just be like, oh, the government's doing something in the Middle East, I guess. Them Arabs, like, people like zero political awareness. Like, these people aren't the ones watching podcasts and listening to arguments. That's who I would count as the normies. Now, if you're just talking to, like, conservatives, I mean, I've said this many times. If David just spent his time talking to conservatives, sorry, my watch is going off, and trying to get them to be more anti-war without contradicting theory at all, perfectly fine. Go ahead. And I very much enjoy that he's in a position where he's able to go on all these big shows and try to move the needle towards libertarianism. That's absolutely fine. Whatever, go ahead. What I really don't like is that he does this and he claims to be Mr. Libertarian. He is Mr. Libertarianism. He's the most consistent motherfucker you know. And as it turns out, he rejects libertarian theory. He's a pragmatist. So that is what really, he constantly contradicts the libertarian theory, and he isn't using it as his base philosophy at all. That's the problem I have with it. But I will just say, on the prostitution point, I think a while back I watched some argument from like an Orthodox priest. Apparently, in a lot of the Orthodox heavy countries, they will allow like vices. They will allow like prostitution and porn, all these things, because like they have this belief that, well, if you just don't allow the vice at all, then you're kind of robbing people of their free will. People have to have like the free will to do the sin in the first place, or else like it's ultimately, it's supposed to be God who's judging these people, and they have to be free to commit the problem in the first place, and then you can maybe like go like, hey, here's why that was wrong. If you're just like puppeting them their whole life, then they aren't really being virtuous.
Well, and I think it's 100% correct. And what happened in the West, at least here in America, and I don't know European history as well, but I would venture it probably happened there too, is that when you use law to compel outward adherence to Christian virtues, you create nominal Christianity, right? Like we talk about fiat libertarians, you're creating fiat Christians at that point,
Mhm.
and then they just stop giving a damn. They're like, I don't. Why are we doing all this? I don't believe in any of this, and you can't put the cart before the horse, right? And so creating Christians in name only who just kind of live out Christian virtues but aren't actually Christians. It's like that's the worst thing you could do as a Christian is to use the state to do that. I mean, like imagine doing it with libertarianism, like making everyone like, say they're a libertarian, even though like no one actually believes it. I mean, it's
Everyone
like,
has to take a week on me before every debate.
oh God, dude, that part of your video where I think I told you or someone this, just where you have, I think I told you on the after party after the debate with Dan, where you just have the whole Rectenwall part. You just have the "Because I Got High" song playing the whole time. Oh man, dude, that killed me. I was just laughing so hard the entire time. Listen, and I'll say this. I know you might have got a little frustrated in my conversation with Dave because we didn't signal post enough, and I'll just one more time signal post here for my audience that like we have some of our disagreements and whatnot, and you and Dave are going to have a debate, and that's all good. But like, I think most of our interactions, like, except for the first one, have been positive, and like you're
Mhm.
not Archie Flowers or Loser Brigade or anything like that. I think I probably should have done a better job in that conversation of like, because Dave and I said we wanted to also do kind of like, hey, let's do like a little quick like I don't know, like a retrospective of the Mises Caucus stuff, and that had much less to do with you, even though the title had you in it. But it was again, I had to make a thumbnail and just figure out what we were talking about in like 2 hours flat. But I wanted to make that point to my audience one more time. That's why I have you on, is because I think you, you do a lot of contributions to the theory. Stephen Kinsella has given praises to your work, and it's helped me be a libertarian. And so I think yeah, I did want to make sure I said that before we hopped off. And I'm once we get this debate scheduled, I will be I'll do my damnedest to be a a very moderate moderator between you and Dave, and I'm praying something positive comes from it and it's not just fireworks. But yeah, everyone, you can follow Liquid Zulu. It's pretty easy. Just go to YouTube and type in Liquid Zulu. I do recommend his courses and all that. Do you have anything else coming up you want to plug before we hop off?
No, nothing in particular apart from the Dave debate. I'm just trying to get that hammered in, and once we got the resolution worked out, I suppose we'll find a time which works, and then everybody will hear about it.
Yep. Chris made a super chat quick. I'll just ask it quick. He said, would Zulu have voted for Trump instead of Chase if you lived here in the United States?
Very probably, because again, I was very much, hopeful for the possibility of freeing Ross, which did happen. Which again, I've said this many times, which is like easily the best thing the Libertarian Party's ever achieved is freeing Ross. So you got to give them props for that.
Yeah, that's
And
the other thing.
also
Like you,
Doge. I was
yeah,
hopeful for Doge as well, which didn't really work out, unfortunately.
right. Like that's the other thing. Like you're not like one of these haters that like hates the Mises Caucus just because they uh some of them decided to vote for Trump in part of this parlay. Like you're just like your whole point, which I kind of largely agree with, is like if they had done that while not splintering the base and pissing off the radicals, then more or
Hmm.
less would have been okay, or at least not like anything to rage about. So, which
Hmm.
I think is completely fair. All right. Well, thanks Zulu for this. It was a lot of fun. Thanks everybody for listening. Make sure if you're watching on my end, you can catch me over on the X Spaces or here on YouTube for that stream. I'm gonna go break my teeth biting some bullets. So talk to you guys later.
Yep. See ya.